on.
Okay.
She's
got what's a face deal there?
right going on.
Okay.
God bless you, thanks.
Let's go ahead. First of all, there are two miracles that we're going to see tonight. The first miracle, of course, is you will see the parting of the Jordan River. The second miracle is that I'm going to cover one chapter in 1 week. So, two miracles tonight, all right? It's never been done before by me, I think. Now, let's read verses 1 through 4 of Joshua chapter 3. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and he and all the sons of Israel set out from Shittim and came to the Jordan, and they lodged there before they crossed. And it came about at the end of 3 days that the officers went through the midst of the camp, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, with the Levitical priests carrying it, then you shall set out from your place, and go after it. However, there shall be between you and it a distance of about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, Shittim is right. I should get my pointer.
I glued it, by the way.
Oh, good. Good. The end doesn't fall out every time. Okay. Shittim, of course, is right here, and it's about 7 miles from the Jordan River right here. Okay? Mm-hmm. Gilgal is a little bit north of there, northwest of there. And, of course, about 6 miles-ish on the other side of the Jordan, of course, is Jericho, which is going to be their target here in not too long. All right? Now, interestingly, the Hebrew word Shittim, it means acacia. It's the type of wood that Noah used in Genesis 6:14. They're called gopher wood. It's also the wood that was used to build the Ark of the Covenant. It was Shittim wood. Now, there's a picture of a Shittim tree or acacia tree, whichever one you want to say. And it also may well be the wood or the type of tree, low-lying tree, that was, quote, the burning bush that we see in Exodus chapter 3. Now, I want you to note as the story unfolds how all the pieces that we're going to go over fit together into an integrated message. And again, the Word of God is an integrated message system designed by one existing outside of time. I'm going to say that over and over to you because it's the best way to understand what the Word of God is. It's an integrated message system designed by one who exists outside of time. Mm-hmm. All the pieces that you're going to see here could not possibly come together by coincidence, right? Isn't it interesting that they sit at a place called Shittim, mm-hmm. and they have the Ark of the Covenant with them, which is central in this story. In this story, in 17 verses, the Ark is mentioned 14 times. Mm-hmm. So it's central to the story. And what is it made out of? Shittim. Okay? So what happens is that God tells Joshua, and Joshua tells the officers, and they communicate among all the people, and they decide they're going to move 7 miles to the west to the edge of the Jordan River. Now, as God tells Joshua what to do next, of course, the officers communicate to the people. They are to move when the ark moves, but they're to stay approximately 3,000 feet away. Why? Why are they to stay 3,000 feet away?
You didn't want him in the water?
Because the ark is holy, and no one can approach it but the priest.
Well, yeah, the ark, but I
thought you meant stay away from it.
yeah, right, I was thinking
No,
more.
they are to stay away.
In the river.
They're to stay 3,000 feet away from the ark.
Alright.
See, they're told to follow the ark.
Okay.
Where the ark moves, they go. That's what is told. But they're to stay 3,000 feet back from it. Okay? So, as Anishka said, over and over again, as you see the stories about the Ark of the Covenant, it is uniquely holy. No one can just go up and touch it unless you want to die.
It
Okay?
refers to it here as it. No, I missed it.
Yeah. So, secondly, of course, they need to not crowd near it because everyone has to see it from a distance to know where to move and when to move. You have to give some space there to be able to see what's going on because they're supposed to respond to it.
But if you really think about it, line of sight a half a mile down the road, that's quite a distance to be able to see something carried on somebody's shoulders. So they had to have flags, banners, something there. But if you just walked out here and tried to look down the road a half a mile and try to picture somebody moving or this ark moving, and there's 2 million people around you that are trying to see it, it would still strain the eyes to be able to see it.
And of course, as you pointed out, and it's a good point, remember the officers of the people is referred to here. They obviously had a very sophisticated system of communication. They had broken the people down and they had enough officers that communicated what Joshua said because you had to organize the movement of 1.5 to 2 million people. It took a lot of communication to do that, iPhones were not working well in those days, so and telephones, etc. So that's very, very good. Now, let's read verses 5 and 6. Then Joshua said to the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." And Joshua spoke to the priests, saying, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant and cross over ahead of the people." So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went ahead of the people. Now, what does it mean to consecrate yourself?
Cleanse yourself.
Spiritual washing.
Spiritual.
Okay? You call it spiritual washing or searching oneself. We could use the word repenting. It is to prepare for a spiritual event. He tells them you need to prepare for a spiritual event. Okay? Now, the immediate spiritual event is going to be what?
Crossing.
The crossing. Okay? Because why is it a spiritual event?
The stepping in a new life.
It is. What
What
else?
did you say?
Stepping in a new life.
Starting a new life.
Starting a new
Sorry,
life.
okay.
Starting a new life.
Why else?
Well, putting it in perspective, it's Passover. Just like the first Passover, they were told not to have leaven in the house,
Right.
to clean out the sin. They were getting ready to leave. We're here again at Passover. And the Passover is about personal forgiveness and repentance. We get to the Day of Atonement, it's about national repentance. So here we see God's pattern in the feast still happening. This is Passover. Concentrate yourself. Cleanse yourself. Repent. You're about to leave.
Remember in the phrase there he says, "For you've not been this way before." This is the closest they've ever gotten to this quote unquote promised land. When they got relatively close before, of course, they blew it and they ended up wandering for 40 years. Also, not only is it a spiritual event that, of course, there's going to be a miraculous parting of the Jordan River. That's the first thing. But secondly, I think he's trying to communicate to them that the way in which they're going to succeed in the conquest of the land is spiritually. Because God says, "I will be before you and lead you." Okay? Therefore, they have to perceive and understand the will of God, the movement of God, the instructions of God to be successful in this. I'm going to read from Ephesians 6, verses we very well know, but think about these verses as they apply. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Isn't that exactly what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, He's preparing the way in miracles. And He says, put on the full armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. And then verse 12, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but rather against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. They are invading a land. Whose land in the biggest sense are they invading? Satan's. Why? Why is it Satan's land?
Because all those
It'll
tribes are not
Nephilim
or the
Okay.
Yeah.
But why? Where did the problem all start?
Esau.
No, before that.
Fallen angels that went with Satan.
Before that.
3:15 Genesis.
In Genesis 3. When the sin occurred, they lost the title deed to the earth that God gave to Adam and Eve. They lost it. Therefore, the earth was legally under the power of Satan. Okay? This is the next step in God taking back the planet. Now, He has a lot of steps in this. It's going to culminate in what we call the cross, right? The crucifixion. But there are multiple steps in it. This is a very significant one. Israel, His chosen people, are going to now take the land back and take it over. So their battle ultimately is not just with the ites, okay? But rather it's a spiritual battle, and there are spiritual forces that they have to go against. Now, interestingly enough, this is a very interesting place, this little area where they were right on the east side of the Jordan River here, okay? They're going to be right around there, where they're right at the edge of the river. This place has an Arabic name that's been associated with it. It's called Al-Magtas. Al-Magtas. And it has for them a very interesting future. For instance, in 2 Kings 2:9, Elijah is taken up into heaven in a, quote, fiery chariot right there. Same place. And I want you to turn to John chapter 1. John chapter 1. And I want you to look at verse 28. These things took place at, and actually technically the word should be Bethabara. Bethabara. Bethabara means the house of the ford or the place of the crossing in Hebrew. And it is exactly the same spot where John the Baptist baptizes Jesus. Now, do you think that's a coincidence? Think about what's happening here.
That was the beginning. And baptized. No, this is the beginning.
Exactly. It was the beginning of His ministry on earth. This is the beginning of taking over the land, okay? And it's in exactly the same place. That's a plan. That's not coincidence, right? I want you to think of all these interesting coincidences as we go on. Now, also, we might turn, you can if you want to 1 Peter chapter 3. And I'm going to read verses 20 and 21 as 1 Peter chapter 3. I'm going to start in the second sentence. When the patience of God, verse 20, kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, a different ark, interestingly, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Now notice what Peter next says. And corresponding to that, baptism now saves you. Not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Isn't it interesting? He's correlating the Ark of Noah as a baptism of those people, and he says in the same way Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and these people are crossing at exactly the same place, and they're undergoing, I believe, a spiritual baptism. Now this is a very interesting baptism because it's a baptism without water rather than a baptism with water. But it's the same principle here. The event is in a spiritual way the baptism of Israel as they begin their new life in the land. And of course it's symbolic of God's preparatory work in the spiritual life, ultimately, of every believer. Let's look at a couple verses about that. If you're in 1 Peter, turn back. We're going to look at Romans chapter 6. Romans chapter 6. Verses 3, 4, 5. Or do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Jesus Christ have been baptized into his death? Now, why does he say that? Why does he say you've been baptized into his death?
What is it? The next verse?
Okay. Therefore we have been buried with him through baptism into death, in order that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in the newness of life. For if we have become united with him in the likeness of his death, certainly we shall be also in the likeness of his resurrection. Many theologians call this the identification truths. You're identified with Christ. You're identified in his death. And in being identified in his death, as he resurrected, you're also equally identified in his resurrection too. And that's what baptism symbolizes. That's what it means. That's the truth behind it spiritually. And of course, this is also, in its own sense, what was going on with the Jews here as they were going through this. Since you're in, why don't you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, since you're in Romans, you're not far away. 1 Corinthians 12. Verse 13. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Another one of the great truths about the identification principle in baptism. And then also in Colossians chapter 2, move over from Corinthians to Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Colossians chapter 2, and we're going to look at verse 12. Having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised up with him through faith in the working of God who raised him from the dead. This is part of why we're told that we only can possibly have one death and not two. Remember in the book of Revelation, we study Revelation when they get to the lake of fire. What is said about the lake of fire? Hell. Mm-hmm. He says, this is the second death.
Second death.
Okay? Christians only have one death. Okay? Non-believers have two. The second one is in the lake of fire.
That's
Okay?
Is that one reason why in the New Testament sometimes he talks about sin bringing death? I mean, ultimately, I mean, is there a reference to what the ultimate result of sin would be?
Well, yeah, it brings death in every conceivable way. It brings death spiritually. It brings sometimes death physically. It brings death in all the aspects that death can be. It does. All right, now let's read. Let's go back to the book of Joshua here, and let's take a few more verses. Let's read 7 through 11. Now the Lord said to Joshua, "This day I'll begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that just as I have been with Moses, I'll be with you. You shall moreover command the priests who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." Then Joshua said to the sons of Israel, "Come here and hear the words of the Lord your God." And Joshua said, "By this you shall know that the living God is among you, that he will assuredly dispossess before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite. Behold, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over ahead of you into the Jordan." Okay? So he says, what were Jesus' miracles that he performed in his ministry called?
Miracle.
They're called attesting signs.
Oh.
What did they attest to?
His glory.
Yes?
Higher.
Father, that he was the Son of God.
Yes, that he had the power, because he was the Son of God, to accomplish the things he said he was going to do and the promises he was making. He was showing a sign and a testing miracle. Well, in the same way, they're going to get one here. He's saying, get ready, because I'm going to show you an attesting miracle real soon. Watch.
Which makes sense because they doubted him so many times and didn't trust him during the time that they were in the wilderness.
True. They did. So, he says to Joshua, "I'm going to prove to the people that I'm with you just like I was with Moses." All right? So, like we said, God tells Joshua to tell the priest to carry the ark to the water's edge and to stop there. We see in verse 15 of this chapter that the Jordan was in spring flood stage. And we know historically that it could have easily been a mile wide. This would have been a mile wide of turbulent, fast-moving water. How would you have felt if you were a priest carrying the ark?
Not very comfortable.
Right. You go, you can't exactly drop it.
Right.
Okay.
Can't touch it.
You can't touch it. You got to hold on to the poles. Okay. So.
Plus, you need to keep your faith.
Yes.
Hold your faith.
Now the ark.
Other people.
Yeah. The ark is called the Ark of the Covenant of the whole earth. That's the phrase that's used here. The Ark of the Covenant of the whole earth. Interestingly enough, that phrase is not found in the Torah. In the first 5 books, you will not find it. It's used here, and it's also used 7 other times in the rest of the Old Testament. What's the implication of using this phrase? Why does God say this?
The whole earth, you mean?
Yes, the Ark of the Covenant of the whole earth.
It implies here under the scope to what is happening.
Well, I mean, what happened then would be Israel found their home, and it is driven down, so to speak,
Okay.
for
But-
the whole world.
But notice, well, that's possible. That's a good point. All right, but notice, that he's not saying the Ark of the Covenant of Israel,
No.
or even of the Ark of the Covenant of God, but rather he's saying the Ark of the Covenant of the whole planet.
Right, that's kind of what I was trying
Right.
to say. But I just,
Therefore, he's telling us that what is going on here is a planet-wide event in its scope.
right,
Okay?
right.
Like I said to you, it's another beachhead that God is making, taking over the planet back again from his enemy Satan. And I think that's why the phrase is used here. Now, let's look at verses 12, let's read verses 12 through 17. Now then, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man from each tribe. And it shall come about that when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of the whole earth, again, an emphasis there, see that, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, and the waters which are flowing down from above shall stand in one heap. So it came about that when the people set out from their tents to cross the Jordan with the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant before the people, and when those who were carrying the Ark came into the Jordan, and the feet of the priests carrying the Ark were dipped in the edge of the water, and as I said, as I told you, it says here, for the Jordan overflows its banks all the days of the harvest. Verse 16, that the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great distance away at Adam, and the city that is beside Zarethan, and those which were flowing down towards the sea of the Arabah, that is, the Salt Sea, were completely cut off. So the people crossed opposite of Jericho. And the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground. Notice it doesn't say muddy, it says dry.
So the ark stayed there. Okay, that's what the picture shows while they crossed.
Yeah, the ark stays in the middle, okay, until all the nation had crossed. Now let's go through this. First of all, it makes reference to choose one man from each tribe.
Right.
We will show you, I will show you what that means in the next chapter. But 12 men are selected. Next chapter we'll see what they do, okay? Once the priests carry the ark and step into the flooded Jordan, the miracle begins to occur that's alluded to. Now, back in Deuteronomy chapter 31, God, in preparing them for what is occurring, says this.
I'm sorry, Deuteronomy what?
31, back a few pages, to verse 8. Deuteronomy 31. And the Lord is the one who goes ahead of you. He will be with you. He will not fail or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Now, it says, can you go back to the map for me? All right, I don't know if it shows it here. It doesn't show Adam. Adam would be up somewhere, let's say, around here, okay? What it says is that the water started to mound up here, and therefore it stopped the flow of the Jordan down here where they were, okay? Not only that, it said that there was no water flowing even further south down here into the Salt Sea, the Dead Sea. Therefore, it not only stopped the water up here, so that everything was dry, it also stopped every tributary that could have possibly entered into the Jordan, because no water got back down here into the Dead Sea while this is occurring. That is a miracle, friends.
Absolutely.
Okay? And what does it remind us of?
Oh, let's see.
Right. Because what happened? God created a wind, it says, and the wind blew and caused a separation of the waters of the Red Sea so that the people of Israel walked on dry ground.
So the Red Sea was probably like this, like the pictures show, and this one was different.
Yeah, it was.
Because the water stopped
Yes,
before.
right. They did not see to the north what was happening. They only knew that in a relatively short period of time, all the flooding Jordan stopped.
You know, most times when water is removed, it's mucky.
Right.
Muddy.
But it wasn't.
I know, it's a miracle.
It wasn't.
But probably in your notes, but how do we know that it was stopped that far above them?
Because it says it in verse, it says in 16, that the waters which were flowing down from above stood and rose up in one heap a great distance away at Adam.
Oh, okay.
Okay? That's the place, that's the town area.
Mr. Teacher,
Yes.
can I give a geography lesson here? Just
Please
for a second?
do.
It's on the map of Jericho. Jericho is up on a mountain. If you look at where the Jordan River is, and you can see the mountains on either side, you're in the African Rift Valley.
Yep, right down
I was standing on the top of Masada, which is just south of Jericho, looking across
Yeah.
the north end of the Dead Sea into Jericho. And that valley looks like it just literally separated and dropped about 1,800 feet. So you got Masada, the top of Masada here, and the top of the mountains in Jordan here, basically the same elevation. Now go back to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now,
which is down here.
which is down there on the banks of the Dead Sea. Now you've got Jericho up on the bluff, looking down on this river. They could clearly see the water stop. They could clearly see 2 million people begin to come across. Not counting the cows, the sheep, the donkeys, whatever else they had. All the gold and silver and all this. They could see it. I stood on Jericho. You can look down into the valley. You can see it. They had to be scared to death.
I was going to say, that would be.
And to watch this, and I'm going to get ahead of myself, but I really think what caused this water to back up was an earthquake. This is Earthquake Alley. I think the walls of Jericho were a result of an earthquake. I think there's some seismic things going on with the marching and the
Handle.
Yeah,
God can
God created this earth. He knows what it's going to do and when it's going to do it. But to think of yourself, Rahab standing there looking out her window going, I think I chose the right side. The rest of the people saying, what are we going to do? It's over. We're done. Right. And Rahab's going, got it covered. To stand there and see this, it had to be heart-sickening for the people in Jericho to see 2 million people come across on dry ground and the river just dry up.
Unbelievable.
Very good. I'm glad you added that. Very good. Now, another thing. Here's another coincidence. Okay? Where does it start? The text says. Where's it mound up? Where's the water?
Adam.
At Adam.
Yeah.
All right? Now, I want to read you something. You don't have to turn here, but I want to read you something. It's 1 Corinthians 15:45. So also it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. Who is the last Adam? Christ. Who do you think is represented at this point by the Ark of the Covenant? Christ. Okay? Isn't it interesting that this all starts at Adam? Okay? I'm certain it's just an interesting coincidence that it happened that way.
You and your coincidence.
Yes.
Well, let me add one more coincidence.
Yes.
If you look at the crossing, it really is a pattern of the temple. The temple, you had the outer court, inner court, and holy place. You had to come through gates to get into the outer court. They came through the Jordan River into what we call Israel, the outer court. Jerusalem is the inner court. The temple is the holy place. So God's again reinforcing that pattern that what's going to be the temple, which is going to be 1,000 years from here, something like that. But God is precise with his patterns.
It's amazing.
God don't make no junk.
No.
God don't make no accidents.
No.
It's engineered. It's science.
And he
Yep.
kind of repeats and repeats and repeats.
Yeah.
Like, you dumb people, get it, will you?
I told you.
Really? How many times do I have to tell you? Right.
All right. Now, let's talk about the Ark of the Covenant. Since it's mentioned 14 times in 17 verses, it obviously is being pointed out here to a great extent. What do we know of it, and what is its purpose, and why would it be so central to this account that we're looking at?
Can I read them?
Okay? So, if you want to, before you start it, I want you to turn to Exodus chapter 25 in your Bibles. Exodus 25.
In your outline, you'll have both sides this
Yeah.
time.
And we're going to start at verse 10, and I'm not going to read you all of this, but what we're going to do is we found a really interesting 2-minute video that I think does a great job. So we're going to run the video here.
Your operator there is not.
Hello.
And they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height. And you shall overlay it with pure gold. Inside and out you shall overlay it, and shall make on it a moulding of gold all around. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in its 4 corners. 2 rings shall be on one side, and 2 rings on the other side. And you shall make poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark, that the ark may be carried by them. The poles shall be in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it, and you shall put into the ark the testimony which I will give you. You shall make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. And you shall make 2 cherubim of gold, of hammered work you shall make them at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, and the other cherub at the other end, and you shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends of it one piece with the mercy seat. And the cherubim shall stretch out their wings above, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and they shall face one another. The faces of the cherubim shall be toward the mercy seat. You shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I will give you. And there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I will give you a commandment to the children of Israel.
That was simply reading in his version, 25, 10 through 22. So, here are the interesting elements. It was made of, interestingly, what kind of wood? Shittim wood. Okay? It was, as he said, 1.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits by 2.5 cubits, covered all over in gold. It had a lid called the mercy seat. We call it the mercy seat. And it had, of course, those 2 cherubim, these very, very powerful angels represented there, at its edges facing towards each other with their wings spread over top. It also had, as you can see, the 2 golden rings on each side were poles made of shittim wood covered in gold were inserted to carry it. Of course, the ark of the covenant eventually resided in the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle and then later the temple, where on Yom Kippur, which we just experienced not many days ago, the priests that once that year would enter into it, make atonement by spreading the blood of the sacrificed lamb over the top of the mercy seat. And of course, Paul tells us, why is it that the blood covers the top? Why did they do that? Because when God looks down, what does he see? The blood.
Blood.
Okay? And who is our mercy seat?
Jesus.
Christ. Of course, it was representative of the presence of Yahweh and could only be handled by the priests. I'm just going to read this. You don't have to turn here, but think about this. It was specially only handled by the priests. There were a whole lot of rules about what they couldn't do with it. And I want to read you out of Ephesians, chapter 3, verse 12. It says of Jesus our Lord, he says, in whom we have boldness and confident access through faith in him. Because of what Christ did, okay, we no longer have this inability to have access to the special presence of God, but rather we're given, because of Christ, the very essence of the special presence of God.
Amazing.
Of course, inside it were the 2 tablets of stone of the 10 Commandments. That's why it's called the Ark of the Testimony. The testimony refers to those 2 tablets. Inside it was eventually placed Aaron's rod, a pot of manna, and then last, in Deuteronomy, at the very end, we read that Moses was told, take this book that you've written and place it inside the ark. So eventually, also, the Torah goes in there too. When it was transported, it was wrapped in a veil of badger skins and blue cloth, which covered and concealed it from the eyes of the priests. Interestingly enough, at the point in which Christ dies, at the very moment, what occurs in the temple? That's right. The veil, it's called, was rent in half right down the middle.
And it was how thick?
4 inches of fabric woven. Okay? It split in half, and of course, why? Because God was saying through it, you now have complete direct access to me, because all sins are paid for. Also, the ark on occasion was utilized in battles. We're going to see one here in a couple chapters. All right? It's central to what happens, of course, in the, quote, battle at Jericho.
What does it mean, utilized?
Utilized.
Used.
Also, in Numbers 10:33, it was used in various battles in the wilderness. And, of course, later on, after this time, it was used in battles against the Philistines, as noted in 1 Samuel 4:5. Interestingly enough, when you go to the book of, it's in Ezekiel, and you go to the last 8 chapters of the book, it's all about the Millennial Temple, this huge temple that apparently is built north of Jerusalem in this kind of uplifted area that's going to occur. We went through that in Zechariah, if you remember. And of course, it talks about the intricate design of this new temple, this millennial temple, but there's something missing in it.
There's no ark.
There's no Ark of the Covenant in it.
Because we have Jesus.
That's right. Because why? Because Messiah is sitting on a throne in Jerusalem. There's no need for the ark as a representation of him. He's there for all the nations to see.
No, that's amazing too.
It all fits together. It's all
We
like...
don't need that representation now, correct? I mean, after he died, we no longer needed it.
Correct. That is correct. That's why I think Luther was the first one about the lid. I think he was the first one to call it, quote, the mercy seat. It's not actually said that it's the mercy seat in the Bible. Luther kind of typified it, and I think it's a good thing to call it. So, all right. Questions, comments.
When they put, I understand what they put in the ark. I don't understand what the significance of the items that went in. I understand the rules, the Ten Commandments, 8 books.
Would this have been the only written words of God at that point?
Are you talking about when
Torah.
then the Torah was finally finished?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know how many copies there would have been. I mean, all we know is that all along, starting in Exodus 17, as a matter of fact, when Joshua is kind of introduced to us at that battle there, you know, what does God say? Write down in a book and tell Joshua. So we know that as the events went on, all the way through the 40 years, that it was all written down.
Right, that's not my question.
Okay.
Okay, the ark was made when?
The ark was made in the 20.
No, I don't mean the year. It was made near the beginning
It was-
of when they left Egypt, correct?
Within the first year.
Yeah, within the first year, all the elements of the,
So if they put in the Ten Commandments, right?
yes,
That would have
the
been
second
only-
copy.
That would have been the only written word of God at that point, is what I'm asking.
Oh, yes.
Well, yes
Probably.
and no. Moses wrote the Torah. He made 6 ascents up Mount Sinai. The Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
He probably had it all written down before
Even
he
before
died.
the ark.
Well,
I'm asking specifically about the ark.
well, the ark was built within the first year.
Right, okay.
At the end of the first year, Moses had been up and down the mountain 6 times.
Okay.
I contend that God had given him the words for the first 5 books of the Bible.
During that.
But if you go to a Jewish temple today, it's a big deal when they open the ark and they bring out the Torah, and they literally parade it around the entire perimeter of the temple or the church. When you think about it, they didn't have Amazon.